Our next speaker is a senior research associate at the Urban Institute. His background, while in economics, is he's actually now a great expert in data visualization. I've had the chance to see Jonathan speak before, and he's a wonderful speaker. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this talk. Please welcome Jonathan Schwabish to the stage.
Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate it. The value and availability of data continues to increase. The supply of data is increasing exponentially, and people are demanding data in ways they have not previously done so. And these trends are driving and are being driven by changes in technology, changes in open source programming languages, open source software, data management tools, data visualization tools, all of which are enabling us to process, analyze, and communicate data in vastly different ways. And as people whose jobs and responsibilities it is to collect data, process it, analyze it, communicate it, release it, maybe even build technologies to warehouse it, our jobs are changing. The demands on us are changing. We are now being asked to facilitate the better, smarter, more efficient use of data in our organizations, in our agencies, in our communities, both internally as we try to convince people across the sectors within our organizations to do a better job of using data, and externally as we try to communicate information to our audience, to our clients, to other agencies. And these changing demands providing us with opportunities. The opportunity to change the way our organizations do business. The opportunity to change the way we communicate information and data. To change the way our organizations process and analyze data. And the opportunity to change the way our organizations make decisions. This idea that numbers have power, that data have power, is not really all that new. Back in the early part of the 20th century, Charles Schwab owned a series of steel mills around the country. And in a famous story he writes about in one of his books, he visits one of his most underperforming steel mills in Ohio, and he says to the manager, "What is going on at this mill? Why are you guys so far behind everybody else?" And the day manager says, "I have no idea. I have tried everything. I have tried punishing the workers. I have tried cajoling them. I have given them carrots. I have hit them with sticks, and nothing seems to work." So Schwab turns to him and says, "Well, how many heats, how many units of steel did you produce today?" And the day manager says, "We produced 6. And Schwab grabs a piece of chalk, and he writes a big number 6 on the floor. And he leaves to go off where big executives go off to. And later that day, the night manager comes in, and he says, "What's the deal with the big 6 on the floor?" And the day manager says, "Well, the big boss was in today. He asked how many heats we produced. I told him 6. He wrote the 6 on the floor." And the day manager goes home. He returns the next morning, and the 6 has been erased. It's been replaced with the number 7. And then it's replaced with the number 8, and the number 9, and the number 10. Because data, numbers, the visualization of that data has power. It can change the way our organizations operate. It can change the way we make decisions. It can change the way people around us behave. Because as John Medina writes in his book, Brain Rules, the more visual an input becomes, the more likely it is to be recognized and recalled. And I can demonstrate this to you if I showed you this table of numbers. Just a spreadsheet that we all produce every day, 1,000 times a day, give it to every colleague and every manager and every person that we see. I give you 4 sets of data, 2 pairs of each, X and a Y, and I say, give me some observations about these data. Most people would say, well, there's this value of Y here that's higher than the rest. Someone else might say, in that last column of X's, they're all the same. That value of 19 seems to be different or an outlier. Others might observe that those 3 columns of X's, they're all the same, and the mathematically inclined of us would say they're integers. And others would say, the 4 series of Y appear to be different, sort of hard to tell, and the mathematically inclined would say they're reals. And yet, very few of you would make any comments about the summary statistics or the relationships between these pairs. And yet, it turns out that the mean, the variance, the correlation coefficient, and the linear regression are all exactly the same for these 4 pairs of data. And when I show these data to you not as a table but as a visualization, known as Anscombe's quartet, demonstrating the importance of visualization, you can see these patterns. You can see the outlier in the y, the outlier in the x, how those x values all line up. You can see the curvature in the top right. Because as you make things visual, we are more likely to remember and recall it. So as Marcus mentioned, my background is in economics. I started my career here in DC working at the Congressional Budget Office. I started by working in their long-term microsimulation model, forecasting, projecting, financing for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And what's interesting about CBO is they have a very specific audience. They're trying to communicate to members of Congress and their staffs. That's a very specific audience trying to meet a very specific need, trying to give them a headline number, a bottom line fact, a single statistic that they can use to communicate with their constituents and their staffs. And now I work at the Urban Institute, a nonprofit think tank here in DC, where of course we're interested in communicating with policymakers, but we also have a broader audience of foundations and practitioners, the public, the press, other researchers, other academics. And so for every product that we produce, we need to be thinking very carefully about their needs. And what's going to help them do their jobs better, and in turn help us do our jobs better? Do they need static graphs in a PDF report? Do they need an interactive data visualization online? Do they just need an interactive online data portal so that they can go get the data? Do they need narratives? Do they need graphs? What do they need? When I was at CBO, we didn't really bother making interactive visualizations because, at the time at least, we didn't believe Nancy Pelosi or John Boehner were going to sit down and click around with some data tool. Just didn't think that was going to work. So as I was at CBO, it became clear to me that the 30, 60, 200-page reports that we were putting out were just disappearing into the ether. No one seemed to be paying attention to them. No one seemed to be reading them. And so we started creating data visualizations, thinking carefully about how to communicate those headline numbers to that very specific audience. Now, I got interested in this because I took Edward Tufte's one-day data visualization workshop. Now, if anybody has taken his workshop, it's more of an infomercial. He rants against PowerPoint. He puts on these very fancy white gloves, and he walks around with some original text. It's all very fun and pomp and circumstance. But for me, there were two things that were important of that day. First, it was the first time, and I've gone through a lot of grad school, it was the first time that anyone had said, think carefully about your graphs. Because people are going to read them. They're going to look at them. They're going to learn from them. And the second thing that was interesting is that he showed something that looks like this. He calls them spark lines. Other folks call them small multiples. Just taking a big, complicated graph and breaking them into multiple smaller pieces. Now, this was particularly interesting for me because while I was at the course, I was working on a report for Social Security on 30 options for Social Security reform. So we were estimating out of the model 30 options for reform. And for each one of those options, we were prepared to show for multiple years the changes in taxes paid by individuals, benefits received, the balance between the two, different trust fund measures, different measures of lifetime benefits and lifetime taxes paid. We are prepared to show members of Congress this. 4 pages of tables and spreadsheets. For an audience who we already know want the single number and the headline statistic. So I came back from the Tufte course and I looked at this and I said, this is not good. And so this was my first shot at an actual data visualization, thinking carefully about the needs of an audience. All we did here was to create small, let's call them spark area charts, replacing some of those numbers with visualizations, so that you could see immediately which options were going to change the trust fund. It's going to go up, going to go down, when it was going to change over time. And from here, from this success, we built other types of visualizations, infographics, new chart types, new report types. And for this particular visualization was sort of the high point. This is a single 8.5 by 11 page infographic that accompanied the long-term budget outlook in the summer of 2012. This accompanied a 200-page report. Single graph boiling down all the information in that report into one summary. And so at the hearing at the House Budget Committee, Congressman Van Hollen actually holds up this infographic.
If we could just go to this chart, which is something CBO handed out. I think it's should be in everybody's packet. It's your one-pager.
Okay, look, this is a win, right? This is a member of Congress, this is a policymaker using a visualization in a hearing, and if you look carefully, you can see he's actually scribbled on the infographic. So this is a win. Now, I'm not foolish enough to think that this actually changed anything, right? We are in the same budget problems that we had 3 years ago, and we don't have a House Majority Leader, right? So we're in the same situation that we were 3 years ago, but this is a win. Someone actually using an infographic. So why did this work? I don't believe the way we change and communicate information and data needs to be driven by executives or managers or folks at the top. I believe it needs to be driven by the folks who are working with the data, collecting the data, analyzing data, working with the content. And that is how we make changes. So I'm going to talk about 2 broad themes about making data work. And because we're at the Socrata conference, I want to start by talking about open data. The probably overused phrase at this conference. These changes in technology are changing the way we interact and consume with data. It used to be the case that if you want to know information about last night's ball game, you crack open the newspaper and you look at the box score. And you look at the hits, and you look at the runs, and you look at the stolen bases, and you figure it out. And now you can yell at your computer, yell at your TV, as the umpire gets the strike wrong. You can see in real time the height and the length and the speed at which the home run leaves the ballpark. And you can see in real time the speed at which the runner runs around the bases. All of this is changing the way we want data, and we demand data, and how data is being supplied. So what does this mean? So we have places like the World Bank producing data and interfaces in very different ways, a concerted effort from the organization to provide data to its users in different ways and in better ways. Google has public data, bringing together data from different organizations, different countries, into a single, more visual interface. We have, of course, data.gov, not actually warehousing data itself, but the meta libraries behind the data. And then we have companies in the private sector, like OpenGov.com, primarily working with state and local governments, and of course, Socrata, working mostly with federal governments to make their data more accessible to citizens, constituents, and other interest groups. But we have a long way to go, as most of you know. Because when you look at a lot of government websites, you get stuff like this. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. If you want to go get data on the unemployment rate, first you have to go find the page. You click on this, and you get a little Java applet, which I should note does not work in most modern browsers. You then populate your little cart. You click Get Data. You get a web page like this that for each series you just requested gives you a separate little HTML table, which you can then download as an Excel file. Or take, for example, my previous employer at the Congressional Budget Office. Twice a year, they release their budget and economic outlook. 10-year budget forecasts for multiple programs. So let's say, for example, you want to get the 10-year forecast for the Pell Grant program. You first go to cbo.gov, then you click the landing page for the report, then you click the Pell Grant link, you get to another page, you click that link, and you get to a PDF report. And now imagine trying to do this multiple times for Pell Grants and Social Security and disability and food stamps and child nutrition programs. We have for a long time been in a place where data have not been readable, published in PDF reports and text files. And now we're slowly moving to a place where data is machine readable, where we can scrape it and we can download it. As an example, the Institute for Museum and Library Services recently released their data, an open data portal. This is great. I've heard a dozen people today talk about their new data portals. This is great. This is about libraries. So I, as a dad in Northern Virginia, can go look at their data about libraries in my area. I can get information about the finances, the employees. I go click in here, using a Socrata database, by the way. And I click in, and what do I get? Variable names. I have no idea what CentLib or PopU or BKMob stands for. Open data is not about just putting data online. We've been doing that for a long time. Open data is about making it more accessible to people. And though we've gone from data that's not readable to data that are machine readable, we need to get to a point where data are human readable, where anybody can use it, where the dad in Northern Virginia can use it, where the mom in Montgomery County can figure out what's the best way to get to work by looking at the traffic statistics. And providing them just so that they're out there so that someone can scrape them does not make it human readable. So in response, we have websites like Flowing Data who write posts like this, how to make government data websites better. 3 reasons why they're so bad. First, The people who are in charge of them just don't know what's going on. The great government workers are lazy and don't know what they're doing. Or they are so, quote, overwhelmed by suck that they don't know where to start. Quote. Or this is just how they've always done it. Right? And all three of these miss important things about working for the government. Imagine, for example, that you work for the Census Bureau, and your job for the last however many years has been to collect, process, analyze, and publish data from a large household survey. And for that entire period, you're publishing data for your colleagues and for other researchers, and so you've been providing that data in the tools that they use, in Stata, SAS, SPSS. And now, of course, you're being asked to provide those data in other formats so that people can scrape them using Python or JavaScript or other tools. Now, you're not being trained how to do that. You're, of course, not being provided with other colleagues and new hires to help you do that, because our governments keep telling us that data is the key, that data is so important, and yet they don't provide the finances or the budgets or the support behind it to make that a reality. And that's why we have groups like these and others, like Code for America and DataKind. We have online things like GitHub. We finally have 18F trying to do better with data, but still needing the support. We have seen proposed cuts to almost every major statistical federal agency in the government to date. And so we have responses like this. Here in DC, the Annie E. Casey Foundation worked with DataKind and a nonprofit called DC Kids Count to create an online data portal so that residents in DC can explore their neighborhoods, education, population, crime statistics, provided by nonprofits and other groups, because governments are unable to do it. And so we have these great events, hackathons and data jives, and they really unfortunately called data paloozas, all bringing people together to try to work with data and produce things that people can use. And too often what we have, and I've heard several of these talked about today, we get coder folks in a room. They're going to make a great web app. They're going to create a thing. They're going to work with all this data. They're going to get stuff out there. It's going to be great. What I think we're missing is the policy folk. We need the coder folk and the policy folk to get together so that the coder folk can say to the researchers and the policymakers, how can I help you? What do you need? What can't you get from this database? Or how can I get other databases and bring them together? And then the policy folk and the researchers can say, you know, you've been working with this data set, but you failed to notice that this important caveat or this bias or this lack in the database. Because each of these two groups have their own domain expertise. And the problem is when I talk to policymakers and I talk to researchers and I say, come to the hackathon or come to the data dive, they all think it's about stealing credit card information, because hackathon is a bad term, right? I've had people actually say to me, I don't want to be sort of associated with Edward Snowden lurking in the back of the room. So I think what we need to do is bring these groups together. Last year, the Urban Institute partnered with Socrata and the Domestic Violence Resource Project, which is a nonprofit organization here in DC, working on domestic violence issues. And what we didn't do was put a whole bunch of people in a room with a whole bunch of data and say, go to it. Go visualize something. Go tell us something. We started the day with a panel discussion from folks from the White House and DVRP and other nonprofits working in domestic violence to talk about what we need to do with data on domestic violence and how we can improve it. And then we broke into groups. And we had the coder folk and the policy folk working separately and working together to talk about how we can do better with data and to visualize those data and to create different products and different tools. Why did this work? How were we able to talk to the CDC about improving their databases? How were we able to publish certain blog posts and reports that did a better job of communicating information than had done in the past? Because we brought different groups together. We didn't start with the executives. We didn't start with the managers. We brought the people who have domain expertise, who work with the data, and we brought them together to work together. Which leads me to my second theme, which is something that I'm calling DataFlow, which is basically the idea of how we have a workflow in our organizations with data. And so I have 4 key principles I want to talk about to unlock the value of visualization in our organizations. The first principle is to build a team. I think people need 3 basic skills to create great effective visualizations. The first is to be able to analyze data, to understand statistics and how to work with data, its pitfalls, its biases, what it can do well, what it can't do well. The second skill set is design. Color, font, layout, user experience, user interface design. How we get users or readers into the visualization, into the document, and keep them there. And then finally, to create interactive visualization, some understanding of programming languages, which today tends to be JavaScript and Python. And every time I teach a class about data visualization, I get people who want to be experts in all three of these. And I tell people, that person doesn't exist. Those people are the unicorns. Like the person who has a PhD in statistics and an MFA in design and wrote the greatest, latest JavaScript library does not exist. The goal is not for us as individuals to become the unicorn. The goal, I think, is for us as teams to be the unicorn. So at the Urban Institute, for example, we have nearly 350 researchers. We have a design team made up of photographers and designers. And we have a web development team consisting of programmers in JavaScript and Node, Python, R, so that together as an organization, we are the unicorn. And this also is not a new idea. In John Gertner's book, The Idea Factory, when he talks about the evolution of the Bell Labs, early on in the history of the Bell Labs, they had a very strict and specific set of skills. They had some physicists and chemists, and then as things got more complicated and the demands grew and they expanded, Gertner writes, it was exceedingly unlikely to find all those talents in a single person. You weren't going to find a theoretical physicist and a mathematician and a mechanical engineer and a chemical engineer all in one person. So just as in the 40s and 50s, the requirements on Bell Labs expanded, we are seeing the same thing when it comes to our use, our analysis, and our communication of data. So first principle is to build the team. The second principle is to embed the team. And embed the team throughout the organization and near the decision makers and near the policy makers. Because as that decision maker walks down the hall to that congressional hearing, you're not going to be able to tell them the entire story of how the analysis was conducted in 30 seconds. They need to know what's going on. Because in too many organizations, we have the data people over there, and the managers over there, and the analysts over there, and the designers over there, and the executives over there. We have all these different folks and all these different silos. And so instead of having all these different folks, we need to bring them together because we just need folk. That's all we really need. So DJ Patel, who is the US Chief Data Scientist, formerly of LinkedIn, tells a story about while he was at LinkedIn, they built, for lack of a better term, data scientist teams. Teams of people who could work with data, understand it, code it, extract it, process it, analyze it. And they took these small teams and they embedded them throughout the organization. And they saw efficiency improve, productivity improve, people engage with one another. And then LinkedIn started to grow. And so their response was to break up these small teams and instead place individuals throughout the organization. And lo and behold, those individuals became isolated, pushed to the side, no longer engaged with the groups in which they resided. As another example, the Tax Policy Center is at the Urban Institute. It's a joint project between Urban and the Brookings Institution. The Tax Policy Center produces a lot of data about taxes in the United States, about different tax policies from different policymakers, different candidates. Tables that look like this, all over the place. Distributions of taxes over time, different types of taxes, on and on and on. And what happens is, if you want to go get that data, you have to either download it as an Excel or a PDF file. But if you want to just copy it from the website, you can't because it's an image file, which anyone who works with data is now yelling in their head about this, because this is crazy. So we're trying to change this process. So here's how it currently works. There's a tax simulation model. It's written in Fortran. There's a whole bunch of analysts who write it. I hear some people sighing about Fortran. Be proud of your Fortran roots. It's good. It's okay. It's written in Fortran. The output from that big simulation model is a text file. That text file is read into Excel. The analysts then come back into Excel. They add the caveats. They add the source notes. They add all the footnotes. And then that whole table is written out as a GIF and posted online. And it aggravates every user. So what are we doing? We're proposing a following solution. We have our Fortran model, and the Fortran model is going to stay the same, although we are working with our IT department to move the Fortran model into the cloud to expand its capabilities and make it run faster. But the model that analysts will use isn't going to change. They've built that model over 15 or 20 years. They're still going to see the same interface. They're still going to work with the same data, the same model. They're still going to output a text file. That text file is going to be read into a CSV, and it's going to be moved into a SQL database. Then we bring in our development team, and they create an internal tool that modifies the SQL database so that the researchers can come back in, add the source notes, add the caveats, add the footnotes. Now that SQL database pumps out another file, a JSON file, and now we bring back the development team, bring in the design team, and create an interactive online tool. So that in this single project, we have brought the entire unicorn to bear. We have brought the analysts, the programmers, and the designers all together to create an entirely new workflow to meet the changing needs and demands of TPC's users. Build a team, embed the team. Once you have that, then it's time to change the habits of the organization. I like this model, written about by Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habit. He lays out a 3-step model of changing our habits. Cue, routine, reward. So let's say, for example, that every day at 3 o'clock, you get up from your desk, you walk downstairs to the local cafe, and you get yourself the biggest chocolate chip cookie you can find. And you eat said chocolate chip cookie, and over the course of 6 or 8 weeks, you notice that you've put on a few pounds. Now, to change this habit of getting this big chocolate chip cookie every day, you need to identify your habit loop. Now, we know what the routine is. The routine is to go get the cookie and to eat said cookie. But to change that, we need to identify the cue and the reward. What's the cue? Or is it that you're just hungry? Are you bored? Do you need to stretch your legs? And what is the reward from eating that cookie? Is it the caffeine burst from eating the chocolate? Do you just have a sweet tooth? Is it that you just needed to get up and walk a little bit? Maybe it's that you run into some colleagues on the way to the Starbucks and you just like to have an afternoon chat. So you identify these 3 parts of the habit loop, then you can modify each of the 3 parts and change your habits. We can do the same thing with our data flow. So let's say we have an analyst, gets a bunch of data, and every week that analyst gets the data and creates a report. And this report is 20 pages with 40 tables, and each table has the same thing we've always created, 30 rows and 40 columns. And the manager loves this report because every week the manager can go look in the 25th column and the 15th row and find the number that he or she has looked at every week. And yet there's something going on in the 10th column and the 20th row that's really important. But the manager doesn't see that because it's the focus on this single number. And yet because of this habit loop, the manager's really happy. So let's modify the habit loop. The analyst is still going to get the data. But instead of creating the 20-page report of 40 different tables, we think visually. Because again, as you change the input to be more visual, it's more likely to be recognized and recalled. So now we start adding color and shapes and graphs. And now the manager is happy, and the analyst is happy, and the colleagues are happy, and the audience is happy, and the users are happy because it's much more easy to see the results, see the patterns, and understand the story. So how do we make these visualizations better? 2 ideas. First, highlight the data. There's your table that everybody in this room produces every day 1,000 times. We can add color. We can add small lines. We can add shapes. We can highlight the data and pull out the important trends and patterns. And I'm not using anything more sophisticated than Excel. It's not about necessarily the newest, greatest tools. It's about thinking about communicating information more visually. Highlighting the data and reducing the data. You don't always need to put in every single thing that you see in the data, the columns and the lines and the tables and the text. Highlighting the data and reducing the data to tell the user the important stories. So we build the team, we embed the team near the decision makers, we start to change the habits of the organization as a whole, and then we build success. And by building success, I argue that it's idea to start small and then build on the success. Not to start with building the most sophisticated, difficult data portal that has all the bells and whistles with 3D pie charts that shimmer in the light. We don't need all that. We start small, build on the success, demonstrate its importance, demonstrate its value to the organization, to the users, and then build up from there. So at the Urban Institute, in June of 2010, this is what we were producing. Standard static column charts, lots of different dark lines on it, labels everywhere. A year later, not much going on, lines with unnecessary horizontal banding. June of 2012, we started playing with maps, because everybody loves maps. And who doesn't love putting circles on maps? And then January of 2013, the first data dashboard, more maps. Provide people with more data, make it interactive, let people play around with it. And then last year we started focusing more on telling stories with data. This is a story on a story we called gunshots. We had data from DC's Metro Police Department, technology that could identify gunshots in the district. And so this combined an interactive map that plotted those gunshots next to schools with a story in text, with sound, with diagrams, all combined together to tell a narrative about gunshots in DC. Created online data portals. This is a project on pensions in different states. Allows you to change the parameters in these pension programs to assess their value, assess their sustainability. And then we tell more stories. This is a project we did earlier in the year on wealth inequality. 9 different charts on wealth inequality. Interactive charts that you can download in different formats, and each one paired with a short bit of text to tell you the story about why wealth inequality is changing over time. The key, I think, is to start small, to demonstrate the value, demonstrate how you can succeed with it, but then not to end small, to move forward. So I believe the principles to unlocking the value of data, unlocking the value of visualization, is to create these teams of analysts, designers, programmers, data scientists. Take those teams and embed them close to the decision makers. Embed the teams, and then as you start to build success, change the habits of the organization. Demonstrate the value of how these visualization efforts, how these data flow processes can be changed and improved, and demonstrate those successes. Because along with DJ Patel and Hilary Mason, who wrote, succeeding with data requires real cultural change. That's where change is going to happen, not by creating just off the shelf some new data portal, but by changing the culture within organizations and getting people to buy into the idea that data can have an impact and data can be valuable. So I encourage you to think carefully about the needs of your organization, the needs of your audience. Do they need graphs? Do they need tools? Do they need narrative stories? And think about how you can use data within your organizations to improve the way your organizations work and to change the culture in your organization so that data and the communication, the analysis of that data becomes a central part of your workflow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we have a few minutes left now if folks would like to do some questions and answering. We have a couple of mics set up on the side here. If you can make your way to the mic when you ask a question, it'll make sure that we get folks on the live stream being able to hear your questions. All right, thank you.
I answered all the questions. Or you all just wanted to get drinks. Either way.
Hi there. I have a question. When you're doing data visualization, sometimes when you're trying to communicate performance stat to a fire chief or police, you have to try and make it simple, but also try and tell a complex story sometimes. How do you make sure you're telling the right story, but also not making it too complex that it's a cool chart, but it's basically unreadable to people who need to use it?
So part of my answer depends on the context. So are you presenting it like this? Are you sitting down with the person in a meeting? Are they walking to the hearing? They're on their way. I'd say in general that, especially for folks who need information and need analysis quickly and they need it right away, too often we put too much on the graphic or the chart or whatever it is. I tell people when they're designing their slides, for example, that you don't need to have all of your notes sitting on the slide, right? Those notes can sit on a different page. I would argue the same sort of holds true, again, depending on the context, the same sort of holds true for complex analysis. That maybe the key thing is just to show these 2 graphs or these 3 graphs that highlight the patterns or the important pieces of information. And then on the second page, there are all the source notes and all the details that lie behind it. Because for many executives, at least, or the fire department chief or the police department chief or the mayor's aide, really what they want to know is what's the story? What's the bottom line? And so in those sort of fast turnaround, fast reactive things, you really just need to get to that bottom line. Now, part of the reason why someone listens to you is because you've built up trust and your organization has built up a reputation for doing good work. You have to make sure that everything that you put out there needs to have quality content behind it. So I would say, again, depending on the context, if it's a fast turnaround thing, I always try to pull out that headline message or that bottom line story, because that's really what most people want. If you think about what we're sharing online these days, it's mostly images, right? So many academic journals are moving just to HTML. And so what happens when they move away from PDFs to HTML is that people are going to share the image. And so you can take images and you can pull off a lot of the clutter, but you can also add some content to that. So another way to go about it is to think about let's say, just take a standard line chart. You have a couple of lines doing this. Your title can be, think of it as more active. Think of a Twitter-like headline when you make your graphs, so that the story of the bottom line is in the graph itself, in the headline. And then maybe also add annotation to the graph itself. If you look at the New York Times 5 years ago, you have never seen a scatter plot, and now they're there almost daily. Because they've started to increase the way people read scatter plots and understand them, and then they annotate them, not just the content, but also how we read the scatter plot as well. Yeah?
Well, I don't have a question, but a remark. I really loved your speech, and I want to ask you if you want to come over to Eindhoven next year to talk about your nice speech next year. Okay,
yeah, we'd
cool.
love to, yeah. So come talk to me afterwards. All right, so building relationships. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the culture change piece.
Yeah.
How do you institute that as a new leader that's running an open data performance program with analysts that may have worked in that government for decades and decades, and they're used to doing things the same old way? How do you start to inspire folks to change their own behavior? And then second, I was going to walk the mic around for anyone who's too shy to get up to ask a question. If you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you.
Wow. Should have led with that. That was good.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, this is, so you asked probably like the most important thing, like how do you get researchers who are very happy, in my experience, researchers or analysts who are very happy to sit in their office with the door mostly closed and just work in front of their computer. So again, I think a lot of the success we've had at Urban is demonstrating how we can, demonstrating success even with very small projects. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, we're gonna make some sort of huge online tool that's gonna have all this great stuff that people are gonna download, but we're gonna make a better graph for you. And we're gonna put it, we're gonna add this text and design around it. It's very simple for our design people to do it, but we're gonna do that very, very quickly. The other thing that we've done is to try to improve, or not improve, but facilitate the workflow or the data flow. So imagine we have 350 or so researchers going through a pipeline of a design team of like 6 people plus 3 or 4 editors. So you're narrowing the funnel pretty significantly. What we've tried to do is provide tools to the researchers so that they don't really have to think about some of these design sorts of things. So for example, we've pushed out Excel templates. We provided training in different tools. We've given them PowerPoint templates so that they don't even have to think about it, right? Because I think what I find is that researchers get flummoxed, like, oh, I don't know how to think about color. And even when a designer sits down with a researcher and says, okay, I don't understand what you're talking about. Draw out for me the supply and demand curve. And I've heard researchers say, well, I'm not a designer, you're the designer. Like, this isn't about design, man. Just explain the thing in a graph, right? So we try to sort of bring the heavy lifting down a little bit so that the researcher can doesn't have to think about a lot of the hard stuff. And then, you're always going to have people, well, not always, but hopefully you'll have some people in the organization who are going to be trailblazers. They're going to be interested in doing that. And so you work with those people initially, and you use those people and their enthusiasm and their interests, and you make these small changes, make these successes, and then the other folks will start to buy in because they'll see how that work is getting spread around and it's getting shared and it's getting used, and that's how I think you sort of do it. So I think it's sort of, to summarize, two things. One is to make it easier. Make it easier for the researchers by giving them tools or training. And secondly, to demonstrate the success with folks who are really interested or enthusiastic about making these sorts of products or changes.
Are there questions from landlocked folks that can't get out?
Hello.
Hi.
To what extent have you noticed any innovation happening in a formalized way, more so with the organizational and policy changes that might be needed in this process? It seems like you're recognizing certain workflows that might need to be changed, so this organizational interface that needs innovation. Also, is there any aspects of policies that could be innovated and changed to enable more of these ways of working in a collaborative way, in a more agile way?
Yeah, so obviously there's lots of new great tools out there. There's all sorts of cloud stuff, and new Microsoft Office, I think, is going to make collaboration easier. There's also lots of great collaboration tools. We're instituting some of them. I'm looking for our CIOs here somewhere. There she is. There they are. So if you want to know about some of the tools that Urban is using, those are the folks to talk to. But in terms of, when I was at CBO, I got really interested in this. In data visualization, I started just creating stuff and then got the CBO director to buy in. But it wasn't, he didn't sort of say, go do this. It was at sort of the ground level on the ground. And then I demonstrated how it was being valuable to sort of the folks in my group, and then sort of shared it with the director. Once he bought in, then it sort of started to filter down a little bit, and then it became sort of a central part. So again, I don't believe an executive or a manager needs to be the person who says, this is what we're going to do. Captain, yes, this afternoon, had the same sort of thing, right? That it's not the leader who needs to start by pushing down. It's that folks can be empowered. I know he hates, I have to read the book now. Doesn't like the word empowered. But you get the idea that it sort of bubbles up from the top, or bubbles up from the bottom, I think, and then it sort of spreads around. So I hope that helps a little bit. I mean, I think culture is the biggest challenge of changing the direction of any organization. And for the world that I'm in of research and analysis, changing that culture is going to be really hard. I'm working on a project right now about helping researchers communicate their research better. And all these folks say no one uses PowerPoint because PowerPoint's ridiculous. They use Beamer. And then I talked to people who have just graduated, and they said, yeah, I used Beamer when I was a graduate student, but now I'm in the real world and I use PowerPoint, which is what everybody uses. But there's all this pushback from sort of the academic community because they have their single thing or their single belief that this is how everybody works, and not quite true when you talk to the other 99% of us. So. Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Hi. First of all, great talk. I really loved it.
Thank you.
And I had a question about what was the defining moment that you had before you switched from economics to database? If any, at least.
Yeah, there were a couple. So I mentioned the Van Hollen one. That was one. The other, I think, was when I was at CBO, we did an infographic. I know infographics are now passé, but that was like it was only 3 or 4 years ago that everybody was excited about infographics. We have short memories. But at the time, when we were all excited about it, I was asked to do an infographic with a report. It was like a 40-page report. Now again, remember, we're creating infographics that are paired with the longer report. So sort of back to your question, right? We have this 40-page report that has all the details, and then we have an infographic that's just the headline stuff. So those are the sort of two ends of that spectrum. This infographic we created, and the story I was told after everything came out, at CBO, the analysts, the analysts usually go up and brief the requesting senator or congressperson. And, And the staff went up to brief the senator, and the senator walked in with his staff, and they didn't even bring the report. They brought printouts of the infographic. And for me, that was like, okay, like we're doing the right thing. And I think the next thing is they're going to bring in their iPads, they're going to bring in their tablets. So the next thing I think is in sort of data visualization. I think there's a few trends that you're going to see. I think the sort of gratuitous animation and rollover stuff, like here's a bar chart and you can hover over it and you're going to get stuff pop up. That stuff's going to go away because it doesn't add any value. But I think we're going to move more towards the tablet stuff where people will be able to play with the visualizations. So I think we're going to see sort of a more spread of the two into sort of true static and true interactivity. So for me, it was just seeing visualizations actually being used by members of Congress. That was like, yep, we're on the right path here. We're doing the right thing. Anybody else? Yes.
Can't make it that.
That's okay. You just yell it out.
Yeah, a friend of mine once told me that with regard to PowerPoint, that the person giving the presentation has the power to make a point. And I guess my question is, is there a peer review process with regard to the visualization that's taking place around the data? Meaning that, you can highlight certain things and leave out other things, given whoever's designing the presentation. So, how is that sort of giving recommendations on how to sort of make sure that there's agreement on what is being highlighted and what is being left out?
You mean in PowerPoint specifically or just data visualization? So for those who couldn't hear, although he has a pretty good voice, for those who couldn't hear, the question was, how do you do peer review around data visualization around PowerPoint? I think it's just an extension of the basic peer review process. And it depends on the organization. So I've worked in two organizations, the third notwithstanding the very beginning of my career. The latter two I've worked for were nonpartisan, trying to do objective work. So that's sort of one case where you're trying to do the best and present it objectively. If you're an advocate, that's sort of a different situation. So let me talk about doing objective work. I think there is a peer review process. And let's take from Urban's perspective, when we take a written report or a project that's going to start with an interactive visualization, there's a lot of back and forth between the research staff and the design staff. And the research staff, they're building the analysis, right? So in some ways, the design staff has to put their trust in the researchers, that the researchers are doing the quality analysis. And often I find in almost every organization I work with, you've got lots of different groups, obviously, but you've got the researchers over here and the researchers over here and sort of generally the design team over here. And the design team complains that the researchers don't treat them very well because the researchers think that all the designers and programmers is just about font and color, and that's all it is, right? And so there's that mistrust. And then the researchers say, the designers just work for us, but we also have to bring in the money. We have to do the analysis. It all rests on content, and if we don't do the content right, then we're just creating pictures. So I'm sort of expanding your question a little bit. So there needs to be not only these teams being built, but there needs to be trust, sort of bringing those silos together. But back to your specific point, I do think that there needs to be a peer review, and I've actually just written a bunch of posts on statistics that you see out there that people put in infographics that are not based in anything. And so the infographic that this person makes is citing this other infographic, which has cited this other infographic. Like, citing infographics is not a peer reviewable thing, right? That's not right. And the field itself, this field of data visualization is trying to grow a little bit, trying to mature a little bit about, is it a science? Is it design? Where does it all lie? There's so many different fields. The computer scientists probably think that they're the data visualization folks and they're the leaders. But 99% of us are making data visualizations in Excel or just drawing them every day. So I think it's really no different than a sophisticated report. There needs to be a peer review process in a visualization and to make sure that you're highlighting the stories and if your job is to present something objectively, is to do that in an objective way. I don't think it matters whether you're writing it in text or you're showing it in a graph. They both have the same responsibility to your reader or to your author. We might have time for one more, or we can be done. There might be drinks somewhere. Okay, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you very much.